Audiobook publishing is on the rise. Of course, I'm telling you something that you probably already know, and if you don't know, well, now you do. It has seen a exponentially huge growth over the past 5 years. So it only remains to be seen like, hey, where do I do this? How do I get started? Well, I've kind of discussed some of those things, but I didn't really address the actual cost of publishing audiobooks. And we're going to discuss that in today's podcast episode, so make sure you stay tuned. This is Self-Publishing with Dale podcast, and this is episode number 53. And it just tickles me to death that you spend a little bit of time out your day to listen to me or watch me over on my new YouTube channel for the podcast. And if you haven't been there yet, you can go over to dalelinks.com/YouTube podcast and hit that subscribe button so you don't miss a single one of these broadcast podcasts. And I want to, of course, bring to your attention that this episode has been brought to you in part by Publisher Rocket. You get your hands on my go-to resource in keyword and category research. This research tool even saves me a ton of time when putting together my Amazon ads with this AMS keyword research feature. Find out why I rave so stinking much about it. And when you visit this link, okay, you're going to go over to dalelinks.com/rocket. Again, that's dalelinks.com/rocket. And remember, anytime you purchase a license for Rocket, a part of the sale benefits this channel while never affecting your costs. See, it's hard for me to say because I'm so excited about it. Again, visit dalelinks.com/rocket to check out Publisher Rocket today. Okay, so audiobook publishing. Over the past few weeks on the podcast, I've been talking about audiobook publishing and how awesome it is. And, if you wanted to get into it, if you want to promote it, but then I haven't yet addressed what is the actual cost of this. So the problem I see a lot of authors running into is they believe that it is expensive. Now, for some of you, it truly is. If you've got an epic novel of say 120,000 words or greater, it might be a pretty penny. But there are still some viable options for you to consider when it comes to publishing your audiobook, and I'm going to discuss that. And for those of you that don't have epic novels, let's say you got a short story, or you have a novella of some sort, or you got a book that's say 20 to 30,000 words, it's definitely affordable. So I'm going to tell you, all right, everything here today. So there's two ways to produce your audiobook. We got DIY. Now, I've talked about this in one of the previous episodes on how you can do it yourself. But for me, I don't have time to do it myself. I really just don't have the time, the bandwidth to learn everything, and I just would rather hire out. So that's the second way. We're going to focus on that way for the most part. Since I already covered the cost of doing it yourself, we're going to talk about publishing the actual audiobooks. So there are ways for us to hire a narrator, and there's also additional costs besides the narration, and I'm going to save that one till about last. So why don't we talk about the ways to hire a narrator? We're going to start out with cost per finished hour. Now you might see it represented as PFH. And now this is how it works. Whatever your book is, the length of it being read aloud and edited and such, that is your total playtime of your audiobook. So let's just say, for instance, you have an hour-long book, which usually comes out to about 9,500 words for an hour of reading. That would be a finished hour. So when I would say, for instance, if I had a 9,500 word short story of some sort and I'll be reaching out to a narrator, I would know immediately if they say that they are $200 per finished hour. I know my project's going to cost me $200 if I go with that narrator. And conversely speaking, and going along with that, let's say, for instance, someone is $50 per finished hour. Then that means that if I go with that narrator, it's going to cost me $50 for that. So you can see how the more words that you have, the more it represents the actual read time or the listening time for the reader to, so this is going to be where it gets difficult. And I think a lot of people get sticker shock and they go, oh my gosh, that's so expensive, because they think, oh man, I'm going to pay $200 for one single hour of content and that's all that person did? Not necessarily true. All right, so you have to understand that when you send the narrator your manuscript, they're going to have to read it. So they get familiar with your manuscript. And they're going to highlight things like certain words they may have to look up to understand and pronounce. They're going to have to take some time to set up and prep their stuff. They're going to have to put aside some time in their schedule. They're going to have to record it. They're going to have mess ups. There's nobody who's perfect in reading a book. They're going to probably have a couple hiccups. There might be like, ruffling of their clothing and oh shoot, I'm gonna have to read that portion over again. So nothing's ever perfect when it comes to audiobook production. So what you have to understand is, on average, 1 hour typically takes right about 3 to 6 hours of total production time. So when you're probably looking at someone and saying $200 per finished hour, oh my gosh, well, it might take that person 6 hours to work on your single hour of content. If you go ahead and you divide $200 amongst 6 hours, you're starting to kind of see that they're not making that much money. Okay? So, and also remember, you're paying for their skills, their knowledge, their ability to do the best service for your audiobook that they can. So that's why I always just try to tell people like, hey, look at the finished price per hour and understand that comes with a specific value that they're delivering to you. And you're going to have to pay them according to that. All right, so let's say, for instance, you're like, Dale, no, cost per finished hour, ain't going to work. Okay, there is another model, and it's actually only available through 2 avenues right now, in ACX and Findaway Voices, and it's revenue share. And sometimes you might even hear me say rev share. And with rev share, what ends up happening is you will agree to part ways with your earnings for a set amount of time in exchange for them doing it at a discounted cost or for free. Let's start out with Audiobook Creation Exchange. If you go ahead and publish to their platform, there's actually an option that's called 50-50 royalty split. And this is actually a 7-year agreement that you make with the narrator. If they go ahead and they narrate your audiobook, they will get 50% of all net profits. So normally you're getting paid 40% royalties per sale of your book through ACX. Well, then it would start to drop down to 20%. And then the narrator would get 20%. Now it is a 7-year agreement. After that, the rights go 100% on over to you and you own it outright. But what happens like if sometime within that 7 years you decide, oh man, this book's really taken off, and you say, I really want to own this myself. Have enough money to go in and buy them out. And you can opt out of that agreement. But herein lies the huge problem. It becomes a little bit of a headache because first of all, you got to get a hold of the narrator and say, hey, look, I want to buy the rights out from you. And at this point, you're kind of at their beck and call, because if you're getting a ton of sales for that audiobook, do you think they're just going to go ahead and give you the bargain basement price that they originally pitched to you at a per finished hour? No. They know the value, and they know that if they sit and collect for the next 7 years and it's doing really well, then they're going to stand something to lose if you just go ahead and buy them out at a smaller price. So they might gouge you. They might say, oh, I'm going to go ahead and take, instead of it's $200 per finished hour if you was originally done with me, I'm seeing that I'm pulling in maybe $1,000 per month. I tell you what, I'll go ahead and take it for $2,000. And you're probably going, wait, whoa, what about your per finished hour? They don't care about that anymore. At this point, you're pretty much at their whim. And I ran into this issue myself, and I said, no, we're just going to go ahead and wait the 7 years out, and you go ahead and keep that. The opt-out also is a little bit more sketchy, because you can buy that person out, and when they agree to it, you get a hold of ACX, then you have to delist the audiobook. Yeah, you have to delist it, and then you can republish it underneath a new agreement, whether you go exclusive with ACX or you go non-exclusive, but you do have to delist and republish it. It's kind of wonky, and I'd asked them, can't we just simply just take them off the agreement? And they're like, no, you have to actually kill the publication and bring it back up. And I asked them, can we transfer any of the reviews? And they pretty much said no. I'm like, oh, great. That's awesome. Fantastic. Thanks. All right. So you have the 50-50 royalty split with ACX. There's also something that's called Royalty Share Plus. Now, this would be, for instance, somebody that is more expensive and somebody that typically doesn't do 50-50 royalty splits. And it's kind of that middle ground. So let's just say, for instance, you want to work with Samuel L. Jackson. And by the way, he actually has narrated some books, and it's quite awesome. Let's say you want to work with him. and he has something that's available, he says, okay, I'll do royalty share plus with you. And this means that he will still take his finished price per hour, but it'll probably be a little lower to accommodate your budget, but he's still going to take 50-50 of the profits for the next 7 years. So this is a little bit more of a viable option if you're wanting to get with a narrator that doesn't normally do royalty share or royalty splits, and that would want to kind of have some type of an investment up front. Remember, they're spending countless hours and they're taking all of the risk, especially at a 50-50 royalty split without the per finished hour. On the Plus program, though, you can see that they're at least able to get some type of deposit before they invest any of their time into this. So there's a little less of a risk for them. Now, Findaway Voices would be the next option. Findaway Voices has something that's called the Voices Share program. It's somewhat similar to the 50-50 royalty split when it comes to ACX, but it's a little better. This is the reason why. It's actually an 80-20 royalty split, and you have to pay 50% of the cost up front. So let's just say, for instance, my boy Kevin McGuire, he's normally $200 per finished hour, and he will take 50% of that up front. So what will happen is I have to pay him at least $100 for him to go into this specific royalty split on Findaway Voices. By the way, I don't know if Kevin does this, but it is a 10-year agreement. When you go into this, you are stuck into this. But here's the nice thing. The opt-out is much nicer, all right? Because you could have a hit on your hands, and you can go in and buy out that narrator. There's no questions asked. You just go on in here and take it. But the thing is, it's going to cost you an additional amount more, 100%. So where I told you I went ahead and paid 50% up front to Kevin for $100, well, now if I want to buy it back later on, I'm going to have to pay the full $200, meaning in total, I will spend 150% on it. And or I just wait till the 10-year agreement's up and all the rights come over back to me, and I only spent 50% on this. So you see, you get a little bit more of a royalty split benefiting you versus the ACX model. And in my opinion, Findaway Voices has better distribution. They have library distribution, which is huge right now. And it's one of the areas that I love going in and checking my Findaway Voices reports, because I'll see a ton of sales through the library system. And especially like right now during this whole pandemic, we're getting even more downloadable audiobook sales and listens through the library system. So highly, highly, highly recommend that. So there's some of those options when it comes to getting your narrator. Understand that it's going to be a very complex situation before you do hire a narrator. Make sure that you review any of their work, that you have them do a sample for you, and that you are both on the same page and setting expectations. I've had a couple narrators that I've worked with that I've had to fire because they are slow. They were set a specific deadline. I had specific expectations that were set. They didn't fulfill them. We went ahead and called it quits. I sent them off on their way, and I got a different narrator that was able to work with me. But I think that's probably a conversation and a podcast for another day that we can kind of cover. Before I get to the very last cost, the most important cost of all, besides narration, I'm going to go ahead and just give a couple quick plugs, because you can join me on my YouTube live broadcasts every Saturday at 12 p.m. Eastern Daytime when you visit dalelinks.com/live. And also, right now, as you're listening to this, or even watching over on YouTube, you can actually know that we do this podcast recording every Monday at 12 p.m. Eastern Daytime on twitch.tv/self-publish. And we have a little bit of chatting on before, and a little bit of chatting afterwards. There's a live viewing audience right now as I'm speaking. And so you can do that every Monday, again, 12 p.m. Eastern Daytime, twitch.tv/self-publish. And if you subscribe with the Amazon Prime, that's free, by the way, if you have Amazon Prime already, you get a few freebies in the process, and you'll be able to help support the channel. All right, the final tip when it comes to cost, I told you it was the most important next to narration, and that is your cover. Oh my gosh, like I almost forgot about this specific point. I'm like, yeah, actually covers usually don't come for free unless you're doing it yourself. And in this event, I always hire out. So this is going to vary per cover designer. So what I would recommend is anytime you get your cover design finished for an ebook or print book, include your audiobook in the whole process. Because one of the worst things you can do is get the cover done, lose contact with the cover designer, or they increase their rates, or they just disappear altogether, And then you're stuck with going to another designer who may not be able to capture the same graphic image, the same layout, and respect or honor the layout of the ebook and print book. So I always just recommend you get all three of those iterations done at the same time if you can help it. As an example, I did this whole how to self-publish a book series on YouTube with the team at Fiverr. And I went ahead and I ordered the ebook and print book for the specific video series. But after the video series had wrapped up, I circled back around to that cover designer to make sure I picked up the audiobook version of it as well. You don't want to just stretch your ebook cover to a square dimension, because you need to have a cover that's 2400 by 2400 for ACX and something that's 3000 by 3000 for Findaway Voices. So with that in mind, I spent about $280 for a print and ebook cover through Fiverr, and I circled back around to her again to get the ACX cover done for an additional $60. That was a little steep for my liking, but it was a good cover, and I'm pretty happy with it thus far. And I'll be publishing the audiobook here relatively soon, so I'll probably get the investment back at least over the next year at worst, as a worst case scenario. Well, as we start to wrap things up here on the cost of publishing audiobooks conversation, definitely I would appreciate it if you could subscribe or follow me on your preferred podcasting platform and leave a review. I actually do check those every now and then on my little Chartable account here, and that Chartable goes out and aggregates all the different reviews and the different platforms. So if you're listening to me over on Apple Podcasts or Stitcher or iHeartRadio, if you just drop a review, it really greatly helped me out. In the meantime, this has been Self-Publishing with Dale Podcast, and I will talk to you folks next week, and thank you so much for all the love and support.